He's a former Lincoln City Councilman. He was elected to United States Congress, obviously. He's a member of the House Appropriations Committee, serves on 3 subcommittees with importance for Nebraska, energy, water, military, construction, and Veterans Affairs, state and foreign operations as well. Congressman Fortenberry serves as co-chair of the Caucus on Religious Minorities in the Middle East and co-chair of the Congressional Study Group on Europe. Please help me welcome today United States Congressman Jeff Fortenberry.
You're very generous, too kind. Thank you, Kobe, for the kind introduction, and frankly, it's just great to see you all. I've had so much interaction with so many of you for so many years. Those of you who are doing great things in business, those of you who are in community service, those of you who are in public service. So let me stand up for you, if you will. Great things happen in America when it starts in local communities who are committed to higher value. And that's what we see here. Kobe, you do a great job as leader of this organization. It's an important organization, it's a good organization, and it's an impactful organization. I'm proud to be a member, although Debbie has not called me about my due yet. She usually does. I never got paid up. Is she here? Usually.
They're not up yet, Jeff.
They're not. I'm paid ahead of time. This is not like the government paying ahead of time. Well, that's great. And before I start, let me also introduce everyone to my wife. Celeste has joined me today. We don't get to spend a lot of time together given the constraints of going to Washington back and forth, particularly during the business day, but we had some flexibility today, so Celeste has been able to. I'm impressed by your auction skills, and I don't know if you all noticed, I waved to someone in the crowd who I recognized as he was auctioning, and I almost had 2 tickets on my hand. I made a mistake one day at a livestock auction. I saw someone on stage that I knew, and I waved at him, I almost had a bull on my hand. So impressive. I was telling Roy Christensen earlier that once you're on the city council, you're always on the city council. And you see things in the community, like the line of the stripe of the street isn't lined up because it kind of bothers you. But anyway, it always stays with you. One day in Washington, I get a call in the office, and I have a wonderful staff, 3 of whom are here. Todd Wilchin is the district director, Jennifer Allen runs communications, and Claire Poland is also here. So I wanted to introduce them to you guys. And they help, along with the Washington staff, help manage representation of 600,000 people who live in Eastern Nebraska. It's a big job, they do a great job. But the phone rings a lot, and every now and then I'll pick it up myself. It's important for me to do that and talk directly to people when they're calling into the office. So one day the phone is ringing, and I pick it up, Congressman Fortenberry's office, can I help you? And this lady on the other end says, can I speak to Jeff? I need to speak to Jeff. This is Jeff speaking to you, ma'am. She didn't miss a beat. She said, that big black dog, it's barking again next door, and you have to do something about it. I said, well, ma'am, I understand. That is so painful. I have had that happen to me. It's annoying and it's difficult. But see, I am your United States representative, and I'm in Washington. We're trying to make laws for the betterment of society as a whole. So it would be best if you call your Lincoln City Council member. She says, I am so sorry. I didn't know I had to go that high. That's an old joke. I'm sorry many of you heard me tell that before. I'm an environmentalist. I recycle jokes. All right. Let me tell you another story right quick. In the mountains of Afghanistan, in the early part of that war, there was a pilot who was flying his aircraft high above the mountains, high above the cloud cover. And it was a beautiful, peaceful night. In fact, the moon struck off the cloud cover and looked like a bed of snow. And it was a night in which he could simply just contemplate the beauty of the earth. And he was flying that high as cover for the troops below, but he heard a crackle come over his radio contact. And that meant that they were in trouble. The difficulty at this point, though, was that the navigation equipment on his particular aircraft didn't allow him to navigate the terrain that they were in. and he had to make a decision what to do. So he literally pulled out an old Soviet Union map, a paper map, to determine his exact coordinate. And using the skills he had calculating time and speed and distance, he made a decision. And he plunged his aircraft through the clouds. And it shook violently. But he continued to head straight downward to try to rescue the world. And when he finally punched out of the cloud, everything that he had been trained for, it was unforeseen. Fire from both sides of the steep cliff hillsides, both sides of the mountain valley, were raining down at one particular point. He knew the troops were right there. So as quickly as he could, he trained his fire on those spots on the cliffside. And counting out loud, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, knowing that's all the time he had, based upon the speed he was traveling and the distance he calculated off of that literal map. He then pulled back out before he slammed into the side. Punched back through the clouds, came down again, decided to do it again, make another pass. Again, the aircraft shook violently. As he punched out of the clouds, literally only hundreds of feet above the ground, he looked and then trained his weaponry onto where the fire was coming from, the steep cliffside. Pulled back up, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, punched back through the clouds, came down, did it again, emptied all his weapons. Went back through the clouds, found his wingman, and he said, "Now you go." The wingman said, "I don't think I can do it." He said, "Then follow me." And with their aircraft literally feet apart, they punched through the clouds again. Johnny Bravo was his handler. Johnny Bravo counted 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, and came back up. And Pat made another pass and another pass until they were both out of ammunition. That night, every man below came back to base alive. He's safe. And when he landed his aircraft, Johnny Bravo was asked, there was nothing about duty that compelled you to do that. Why did you do that? He said, they would have done it for me. That's all he said. What we are suffering from in America is a deep sense of crisis about the lack of trust of government, the lack of trust of leaders, the lack of trust of the system. If we're going to recover ourselves, recover our narrative, build upon our strengths, and truly create a flourishing society, we're going to have to think deeply about these higher values and rediscover them in the local community, in the national community, and now in the international community. What I want to cover with you today is our national security, our economic security, and what I call our family security. The most important job of the government is to keep it safe. And I believe in the 3D policy: defense, diplomacy, and development. Our defense, they're unmatched in the world. They are. But we are living in the remnants of a post-World War II construct for international stability that is under great stress. There are other economies, other nations throughout the world who have benefited tremendously from our sacrifice. After World War II, we were cast into the role of the world's unifying power, or world superpower. And we sacrificed greatly in terms of lives and resources to try to build up the opportunity for other peoples in faraway land to have some semblance of what we have. A flourishing and good culture, stabilizing, ordering set of rules called law, participatory governing system that is built upon a philosophical concept, namely the inherent rights and dignity of all persons. All you have to do is look at the 2 Koreas and see what a difference that makes. A couple of miles to know what America's sacrificed for our nation. But we're living in a time in which we cannot do this by ourselves anymore. We're not living in a unipolar world. And there are other countries who have advanced rapidly, who have benefited from our sacrifice, who must take an ever-increasing place at the seat of the table of responsible nations by sacrificing themselves. I had this as a brief anecdote in this regard. The Speaker of the Italian Parliament, and the Italian government changes frequently, but nonetheless, they visited Washington, and I have some Italian heritage, so they asked me to come. So she gave a nice speech about the importance of relationship, and at the end of it I said, why don't you pay your NATO dues? Kind of a shock, everyone there, because it was a brusque comment. I said, listen, and I went through what I just said. The responsible nations of the world are no longer going to be able to hide behind our goodwill, our protectionary mechanisms. You can't free ride off of this anymore. We're going to have to come to some consensus whereby the United States, of course, will continue to lead, but in strong partnership with other nations who know what is at stake. And what is at stake is the future of civilization itself. All you have to do is look at the Middle East and what's happening. With a group of 8th century barbarians who have 21st century weapons, and they're wreaking havoc over a geographic area the size of Indiana. It's a religious death cult that has committed itself to a twisted form of idealism that is seeking to wipe out ancient civilizations and populations, Christians, the Yazidis, other religious minorities. And the people that they've killed the most, by the way, ISIL, is innocent Muslims. All in the name of this bizarre, irrational ideology that's twisted, but has an appeal to certain people. They're not JV. They have to be confronted. But it has been important that the United States resist the immediate call by the international community to come in there and clean it up virus. We will lead, but this must be predominantly fought by Sunni Arab leaders, one of whom I met with just last week in Jordan. The second point, diplomacy. This has a decided tie to our own national security and international stability. You should never pull the trigger on someone who you've not first looked in the eye. The military tells me, do everything you can to build goodwill in the process. Send us in last. It's too dangerous. It's too violent. The costs are too high not to do everything we can to try to build mutual understanding with those who we can and try to diminish the prospect of war. That's where the third component of smart development comes, sustainable development. When you have persons who are oppressed because they have no ordering mechanism which allow them to work, they are susceptible to being manipulated by twisted forms of nationalism and ideology. Empowering a person to have a little bit of their own, a little bit of participation in their governing structures with our assistance and our help is not only the humanitarian right thing to do, it also benefits us because we exchange things economically and culturally. But it creates the conditions for international stability and mitigates the potential for, again, bizarre forms of ideology to manipulate emotions and cause people to fight. So that's the 21st century architecture of our national security. Strong defense, smart diplomacy, sustainable development. Economic security. How do we get there? We're living in an entrepreneurial winter. Now, in Nebraska, we're in pretty good shape in many ways. Strong resource base, strong commitment to community, strong leadership. Any small town in Nebraska that's doing well, if you ask them, what's the key? Why are you doing well? Well, the first thing to say is strong leadership. You have to have people committed to the community. So I call this the Nebraska model that would serve America very well, emulate what we do back home. But small business is a key to a vibrant economy. Never before have there been more small business deaths than there are births. We depend in the United States for economic inclusion purposes, for job creation, on the micro business sector. It's not to say that large corporate entities aren't important, but that's not where most jobs come from. And by the way, you have this Washington, Wall Street political and economic access that has formed a cartel that is decreasing the ability of small business to flourish. And how does that manifest itself? Well, this research isn't from me, it's from Gallup. I had a long visit with Jim Clifton the last year or so. And there's a book that he has called Entrepreneurial Strength Finders. I'd recommend it to you, so many of you are engaged in small business. And he not only cites this problem, again, which has never happened before in the history of America. We've always had more business development than business flaws. But he goes into the question as to why. The conclusion is two things: healthcare and regulation. Back to what Dr. Rustad was talking about. Listen, we have a new healthcare law. You had some cracks in the healthcare system where people were being left out. For instance, people with pre-existing conditions did not find access to affordable quality health insurance. Those were realities. But what has happened now is the entire system has been turned on its head. So what you were promised is, with declining costs and increasing choice, has not materialized at all. Your rates are skyrocketing, and you have less support. I don't think it's good enough, and I'm not happy, this is not a political talk, but I'm not happy to be on the Republican side of the aisle. I don't think it's good enough for Republicans to say, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, we have to also offer an alternative. So I'll offer an alternative to you today. And it's a three-leg stool. And I have two of the bills in this regard. First is access to affordable, guaranteed access to affordable quality catastrophic insurance. We don't insure our car for oil change, we insure it for nothing major going wrong. The same with our health insurance. It's a long history, I won't go into that, as to why we got health insurance tied to business in the first place, and why we basically turned our management of our own first dollar health care cost over to others. But that is going to have to shift, and by nature it already is shifting with the escalating deductible. So the second point is health savings account. This is the solution for the next generation, for those of us who are getting older, maybe not. But the next generation has time to build up a significant account that they manage, and what Dr. Rustad has pointed to in terms of price transparency comes about as a systemic reform. What other service do you buy where they say, come when we tell you to come, we're not going to tell you the price, and we won't guarantee the outcome? It doesn't happen. And yet, we've structured medicine in this way. And it's nobody's fault. It's just gravitated that way. And individual doctors, just Dr. Rustad, I talk to them all the time, are frustrated because they want to care for patients. Deal with complexity, administration, and all these other things. They want to care for patients. But the way the next generation solution is, again, guaranteed affordable access to quality catastrophic insurance combined with health savings account, with price transparency mechanisms, I have a bill called Know Before You Go, that will create the opportunity for the next generation to better watch their first dollar health care costs in partnership with their doctor, while also being covered if something serious could go wrong. You shouldn't be worried when you're in the gurney in the hospital with the mask on. Can you give me the price list for anesthesiologist, please? I gotta check this out right now. No, you're covered. But in ordinary stuff, the system is creeping in this direction. We just need to accelerate. This will bring about the reforms that will stop decreasing the ability of small businesses to ever absorb these increasing costs, which is one of the constraints that's happening to them and why we have entrepreneurial problems. A little anecdote. I think it was someone who was on one of my telephone town halls. She told me that she and her husband were interested in starting an architecture firm. Either she was an architect or her husband was an architect. So they began to look at the cost of doing this. Their upfront cost for health insurance is $30,000 before they even get started. Then here's why: because in the marketplace, for a family range, they're going to end up paying approximately $1,500. But they had a sick child who is going to meet the $15,000 deductible. How about $30,000? So what does that do? It delays their decision. Can we absorb that cost? I'll just stay tethered to the institution that I'm already in. You see how this represses entrepreneurial ability to get ahead? It shouldn't be that at all. It should be unleashing entrepreneurial ability. So the healthcare can be affordable, move around with you, but you always have guaranteed access. There's a lot of ways to do that. And the government would have to be involved. The government is involved in health savings. This is the reform mechanism that I think will go along to help it. But we cannot return to the place where we were, where some people were left out. Nor can we sustain the inertia of the current system, which is delivering escalating costs and less choice, and crushing the spirit and goodwill of good doctors who want to be entrepreneurs. The second problem is regulatory overlay. Look, smart regulations are necessary to set up the guardrails so the marketplace can flourish, so that it's fair. All regulations aren't bad, they're necessary. When I was in the city council with one of the local staff in the community, he was in charge of one of the regulatory apparatuses at the local level. I said, look, let's go out and instead of looking for people who have violated something, let's get in front of this and say, hey, here's the rule that we've laid down for health and safety and well-being. Okay? Here's what we need you to match. If you have another way of doing it, tell us. If you exceed this, wonderful. It makes better sense for you. So moving from a gotcha mindset to a partnering mindset so that there's a fair playing field for everyone in small business. That's a change of culture that we're going to need to see if we're going to revitalize small business. Second one, Made in America. Celeste and I were at a conference this weekend and we heard from a major CEO of one of the major companies in the country, tens of thousands of employees. He talked about buying a failing company in Green Bay, 1,000 employees, getting ready to shut down old line manufacturing of tissue equipment. They bought it. So the '08 crisis hits, everybody is shuttering facilities, their business is off 35%, people are starting to move jobs overseas. But he goes in and says, look, they implemented some streamlining mechanisms, modernized things, empowered the persons who work there. In fact, in his presentation, what he showed us was a bride and her father walking the bride down the aisle. This is the CEO of a company. And he says, every person is somebody's daughter or son. That's what we try to animate in the spirit of our respect, value. Our outcomes are not just the bottom line of profitability as it's traditionally measured, but the well-being of the person. So, back to that first point, trust. He pulls the whole company together and says, we got a 35% decline in business. Help us through this. The entire company agreed to take a 1-month furlough, everyone, so that they were able to weather the storm. Everyone. Shared commitment to a greater idea, because that trust came from the CEO who went beyond just looking at the spreadsheet for the value of the person's work. And not one job overseas. We're going to restore America. We have to restore Made in America. We live in an interconnected world. This is not anti-free trade, but what this is we need to be smart about this. Giving away our manufacturing capacity, not enforcing international trade, watching other countries manipulate the system. While we stand by and are victimized by this, no more. Can't do it. If we do these things, have a new type of healthcare, release the potential of the entrepreneurial sector, make sure our regulations are smart, and revitalize the Made in America place. That is a program for restoring economic opportunity. Third one, family security. I've introduced a new term into the lexicon in Washington, and it's called social conservation. What do I mean? Well, when we think of conservation, we know how to preserve our land, we know how to protect our water. We do so willingly, because these are deep things we value, they're important to us. We respect that we are stewards of what has been handed to us from the past, and our obligation not only to ourselves, but to the future. We do that. But what about the ideals of tradition and the mechanisms by which we order society and culture so that it is flourishing and points people toward good choice and proper ends? Why should we talk about this in a political sense? Because no one does. And politics is downstream from the culture. The ancient philosopher once said, let me hear the songs of the nation, and I don't have to see its laws. In other words, if we have a fragmented, atomized, broken society all around us, how can you expect the outcomes in Washington or any level of government to be right? So, you don't pass a law in this regard, but all of us have a risk. You can try to pass laws in this regard, but the best thing to do is for all of us to really think deeply about, again, the values we've been handed, the values we possess. How do we rebuild family life? How do you create vibrancy and proper place for faith life, and restoring the interdependency of community life. I belong to the Rotary Club. Sorry for those of you who were in Guam. I said that before in a Kiwanis meeting. Nearly ran out. But the whole point being Rotary Kiwanis, you know, in Rotary, there's a sign at the banner that hangs in front of it. Says, is it true? Is it fair? Will it build goodwill and friendship? One of them. There's four of them. Sorry, but you get it. You get it. Why don't we hang that sign in the U.S. Congress? Is it fair? Will it build goodwill and friendship? Is it true? There's your answer, right there, to a good society where there is interdependent sense of belonging, a sense of care, a sense of value. This is Martin Luther King Day, and I want to read just a quick paragraph from a quote from his letter that he wrote when he was in jail in Alabama in 1963. It's fairly long. It goes into a lot of detail about various things, but he's drawing from his faith tradition, his deep sense of justice for what has happened to him and his people. He says, moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. I was asked by Shirley Lim to come to Beamer one Saturday. Beamer, Nebraska, you know, north here, a little bit northwest, between West Point. Shirley lost her son, Joseph, in Afghanistan. You remember there were 6 service members killed a few weeks back. And I had met Shirley a number of years ago. She'd come into the Fremont office, and we had some constituent service matter with her. So there we are in Beamer, where this young man grew up, this man had grown up. We were in a gym that was probably built in the 50s. It's old wood floor, and it stayed, the old curtains, you know, all of them, all through Nebraska. And here was a young man who played basketball, who excelled in high school sports, who was just Hollywood handsome, they called him Superman, who after high school immediately joined the United States Air Force, and then later became a detective with the New York City Police Department. Then put the uniform on again for a third time. It became part of New York National Guard. And gave his life for us. Was it anything that the federal government did to make Joseph Lem the person that he was? It was the community of Beamer, the values that were provided to him by his friends and classmates, family. The understanding of how life ought to work, being in such a good community like that, that is deeply interconnected. It made him understand, I suspect, that sometimes we have to sacrifice for others, for things that are bigger. So we put on the uniform 3 times, served 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. Senator Sass was there, Governor Ricketts was there, myself, and some other representatives. When I saw Shirley, all she did was just hug me. And I only met Shirley briefly 7 or 8 years ago. But she hugged me like I was a member of her family. I think in Nebraska we've retained a sense of this idea of social conservation, that each of us matters, and we're interconnected. If we want to recover America, if we want to project the ideals of goodness, universal, that, by the way, people throughout the world are longing for, restoring this sense of trust, from the community level, from the institutions of great tradition, family life, faith life, community involvement. That's the core strength of America. That is what is missing in our discourse politically at the national level. That's how we will find ourselves. Thank you all so much for being with me today. I'm going to stop here. I don't know if did I leave enough? Oh, I gave you 2 minutes for a question. I'm sorry, 1 maybe or 2? Or?
What's that?
Oh, by the way, I wanted to comment that I really like what you've done with this idea of the Pledge of Allegiance at the end of the meeting. Because what we do when we do that here in LIBA, and I've never seen this done before, is not, we don't start by reminding ourselves, but we remind ourselves before we walk out of the door what the pledge means. So whether or not you're in mission, or in business, or in community service, or in political service, you're in mission for good, for great good. So, as one member, military man once told me, one team, one fight. Thank you all.